Have you ever wondered what your life would be like if everything you've built fell apart in a single day? How would you react if, suddenly, all your certainties were replaced by an abyss of doubts? This is the story of Mateus Oliveira, a man who had everything until he had nothing left. But before judging the end of this journey, let me tell you how it began. Imagine waking up on an ordinary morning with the sun streaming in through the window, the smell of fresh coffee, and the feeling that the world is within reach. Now, imagine that same day ending with you on your knees, amidst the rubble of what was once your life. Does it sound dramatic? Perhaps. But life has these twists and turns that not even the most talented writer would be able to create. This story isn't just about loss and pain. It's about finding divine faithfulness in the most unlikely moments, when all that's left is a thread of hope so thin we can barely see it. Join me on this journey and discover how one man rediscovered the meaning of the phrase, "Thou art faithful, Lord," when his own faith seemed to have completely disappeared. Mateus Oliveira was the kind of man who caused envy. At the age of 38, he owned a successful construction company in São Paulo, the result of 15 years of hard work and dedication. He had started as an intern in a small company and, with unwavering determination, had built his own empire. His office on the 20th floor of a commercial building on Avenida Paulista offered a panoramic view of the city he had helped build. Residential buildings, shopping centers, schools. Construtora Oliveira's signature was scattered everywhere. "Mr. Oliveira, your wife is online too," announced Deborah, his secretary, through the intercom. Matthew smiled as he answered. Helena, his wife of 12 years, was his rock, his confidant, the woman who had been by his side since the days when he was nothing more than an ambitious young man with big dreams. "Hi, love. Don't forget that today is Bia's ballet performance. It starts at 7, so we need to get out of here at 6 at the latest." "Of course I haven't," he replied, looking at the photo of his 10-year-old daughter on his desk. Beatrice was the light of his eyes, a sweet and intelligent girl who had inherited her father's determination and her mother's grace. After hanging up, Matthew turned his attention to the contracts on his desk. A new development was about to be closed, a luxury residential complex. That would be the largest project of the construction company yet. Everything was going perfectly. That night, sitting in the front row of the school theater, Mateus proudly watched his daughter dance. Helena held his hand, and he felt that familiar sense of fullness. He had a successful career, a loving family, health, professional respect. What more could a man want? "She's amazing," he whispered to Helena, who nodded with tears in her eyes. At the end of the presentation, while the family celebrated at a nearby pizzeria, Mateus made a toast. "To my favorite ballerina and the most beautiful woman in the world, you are my life." Beatrice smiled, showing off the newly placed dental braces, while Helena looked at him with that love that, even after so many years, still made her heart race. It was a perfect life, too perfect to last. Thursday morning started like any other. Mateus woke up at 5:30 a.m., did his morning 5-kilometer run through the neighborhood, had his balanced breakfast, and kissed Helena and Bia goodbye before heading to the office. "I have an important meeting this afternoon. I may be a little late for dinner," he warned. "No problem. Just don't take too long. I made a reservation at that Italian restaurant you love," Helena replied with a smile. On the way to work, Mateus received a call from Ricardo, his accountant and longtime friend. Subscribe to the channel and leave your like. Mateus, we need to talk urgently. I'm going to your office now. There was something in Richard's voice that made Matthew uneasy, but he tried not to think about it too much. It was probably just some bureaucratic issue that needed to be resolved. When he arrived at the office, he found not only Ricardo, but also two men in suits who introduced themselves as agents of the federal police. Mr. Oliveira, we have a warrant for the seizure of documents and electronic equipment related to your company. You are being investigated on suspicion of fraud in bids, money, laundering, and cartel formation. The words hit Matthew like a punch in the stomach. He looked at Ricardo, who looked as pale as he probably was. There must be some mistake, he managed to say, as he watched the agents begin to collect computers and folders. Mr. Oliveira, I suggest you contact your lawyer immediately, one of the agents said, handing him a copy of the warrant. The next few hours passed in a blur. His office was ransacked, employees were interrogated, and the news spread like wildfire. Even before lunch, journalists were already crowding the entrance to the building. When he finally managed to speak with his lawyer, Dr. Mendez, the situation became even clearer and frightening. Mateus, the situation is serious. It seems that his former partner, Gustavo, made a plea bargain. He is accusing you of being the mastermind of a bribery scheme in public contracts. This is absurd. Gustavo left the company 3 years ago because I discovered irregularities in the accounts he managed. I know, but he has documents, emails, recordings. We need to analyze all this calmly. As they talked, Mateus's cell phone kept ringing. Customers canceling contracts, business partners distancing themselves, friends asking what was going on, and then the connection he feared the most, Helena. Matthew, I'm seeing you on the news. What's going on? Her voice trembled, and he could feel her fear and confusion. Helena, I don't know for sure. It's a misunderstanding. I'm sure. I'll work it out. Bia is with me. She saw the report on a friend's cell phone. She scared Matthew. That was like a stab. His daughter, his princess, seeing her father being treated like a criminal. Tell her that Dad didn't do anything wrong. I'll explain everything when I get home. But Matthew did not come home that night. At 5 p.m., he was taken to the headquarters of the federal police to give a statement. The interrogation lasted for hours. When he was finally released, it was already past midnight. When he got home, he found Helena awake in the living room, her eyes red from crying. They froze our accounts, Mateus. All of them. The credit card was declined at the restaurant. I had to call my mother to come and pick us up. Matthew sat heavily on the couch, feeling the weight of the world on his shoulders. Helena, I swear by all that is most sacred. I have done nothing of what they are saying. She looked at him for a long moment, as if trying to see the truth in his eyes. I believe in you, he said finally, but what are we going to do now? It was a question to which he had no answer. The days that followed were a slow-motion nightmare. The police operation gained a pompous name, Operation Shaken Foundation, and made national headlines. Matthew's face was in all the newspapers, always accompanied by words like suspect, scheme, and corruption. The construction company was interdicted. Employees were dismissed. Projects in progress paralyzed. In just 1 week, the empire that Matthew had taken 15 years to build collapsed like a sandcastle. Subscribe to the channel. Dad, why doesn't Julia want to be my friend anymore? Beatrice's question, asked during breakfast 10 days after the investigation began, broke Mateus's heart. Her daughter, who had always been popular and well-liked, was now being isolated by her peers. Her parents saw you on TV and said you're a bad man, she continued, tears in her eyes. But you're not evil, are... You, Dad? Matthew hugged her tightly, fighting back his own tears. No, Princess. Dad is not bad. Some people are confused, but soon everything will be cleared up. But things did not clear up. On the contrary, they have worsened. With the accounts blocked and without income, the family's financial situation deteriorated rapidly. The luxury car was sold. Helena's jewelry, too. Beatrice's private school tuition could not be paid, and she had to be transferred to a public school. The house, large two-story house in a gated community, soon became an unsustainable luxury. They had to move to a small apartment in the suburbs, borrowed by an uncle of Helena's who had not yet abandoned the family. Because that's what happened. One by one, friends and family moved away. Some openly, others with lame excuses. The social circle that once surrounded them has almost completely evaporated. I don't understand how people who dined at our house, who received expensive gifts, who asked for favors, now pretend they don't know us, Helena vented one night, while arranging boxes in the small apartment. Matthew did not answer. He was sitting on the tiny porch, staring up at the night sky, trying to understand how his life had been derailed so completely. The worst thing was the impotence. Despite all the efforts of his lawyer, the charges against him seemed to multiply. Gustavo, his former partner, had provided the authorities with an impressive amount of evidence, documents, emails, audio recordings, all carefully manipulated to incriminate Matthew and exonerate himself. How could he do this to me? Matthew asked himself repeatedly. After all I've done for him. Gustavo had been his friend since college. When Mateus opened the construction company, he invited him to be a partner, even though he knew that he did not have the same commitment. For years, it overlooked its mistakes, covered its shortcomings, protected it, until he discovered that Gustavo was embezzling money from the company. Instead of reporting him to the police, Mateus offered a deal. Gustavo would sell his share in the company and leave discreetly, a gesture of mercy that now came back to haunt him. Your problem, Matthew, is that you trust people too much, Dr. Mendez said during one of his meetings. Gustavo planned this for years. He kept documents, manipulated emails, created a false trail that is now being used against you. But there must be a way to prove my innocence. We are working on it, but it will take time. And time is something you don't have much of right now. The lawyer was right. 3 months after the beginning of the investigation, Mateus was formally indicted for several crimes. The possibility of preventive detention hung over his head like a sword of Damocles. It was at that moment, when all seemed lost, that Helena did something unexpected. She took him to church. Church? Helena, you know I haven't been to church since I was a teenager. Matthew looked at his wife with a mixture of surprise and skepticism. They were sitting at the table in the small apartment, dining on a simple meal, very different from the sophisticated restaurants they used to frequent. I know, but I've been gone for the past few weeks while you're with the lawyer. It's a place where I don't feel judged, where I can just breathe. Helena looked different. Despite all the difficulties, there was a serenity in his eyes that Matthew had not seen in months. What kind of church is it? It's a small evangelical church nearby. The pastor, Josiah, is an amazing man. He doesn't care who we were or what we have. He just accepts us. Matthew sighed. He had nothing against religion, but he had never been particularly religious. His parents had taken him to church as a child, but he moved away as a teenager, focusing on more practical goals. I don't know, Helena. Please, Matthew. Only once. For me and Bea. When mentioning her daughter, Helena touched a sensitive point. Beatrice was suffering a lot from the whole situation. I had frequent nightmares. I cried about anything. I was having a hard time at the new school. If a visit to church could bring some comfort to her, it might be worth it. That's okay. When? Tomorrow night. There is a service at 7 p.m. The next night, dressed in a simple shirt, quite different from the expensive suits he used to wear, Matthew accompanied his wife and daughter to a small church on a quiet street. The building was modest, nothing compared to the imposing cathedrals or gigantic temples I saw around the city. When he entered, he expected judgmental looks, whispers, the treatment that had become common in his life. Instead, he was greeted with genuine smiles and warm handshakes. "You must be Matthew," said a middle-aged man with gray hair and a gentle smile. "I'm Pastor Josias. Helena and Beatrice told us a lot about you." There was no condemnation in their eyes, just a quiet kindness that caught Matthew off guard. The service was simple, without the pomp he associated with religious ceremonies. Ordinary people singing with sincerity, prayers that seemed like genuine conversations with God, a message that spoke of hope in the midst of suffering. It was during one of the chants that something strange happened. The congregation was singing a hymn that spoke of God's faithfulness, and Matthew felt an inexplicable emotion wash over him. "Thou art faithful, O Lord my heavenly." "Father, thou shalt give full power unto thy children." The words seemed to speak directly to his situation. Faithfulness, something he valued so much and had been betrayed by so many he considered friends. Power, not the worldly power he had lost, but something deeper, more sustaining. "Yours is glory, eternal majesty. Great is your faithfulness, O Lord, to me." Without realizing it, Matthew was crying. Not the suppressed tears he shed when he was alone, but deep sobs that came from a place he didn't even know existed inside him. Helena held his hand, and Beatrice snuggled against his chest. There, in that simple church, surrounded by strangers who treated him with more dignity than his former friends, Mateus felt something he hadn't felt in months: peace. After the service, Pastor Josias approached. "I'd like to talk a little bit if I have time," he said. Matthew nodded, and they sat down on a bench in the small garden of the church. "Helena told me a little about what you are going through," Josias began. "It must be very difficult. Subscribe to the channel." "You have no idea," replied Matthew, surprised by his own frankness. "I lost everything. My company, my reputation, my friends, and the worst thing is that I'm innocent. But no one believes me." "I believe," Josiah said simply. Matthew looked at him, surprised. "You don't even know me." "No, but I've known Helena and Beatrice for a few weeks, and I see how they talk about you, how they trust you. That tells..." me a lot about what kind of man you are. But what about the accusations, the proofs? Aren't you curious? Josiah smiled. Matthew, I spent 20 years working as a chaplain in prisons before I became pastor of this church. I have known truly guilty men and men unjustly accused. I learned to trust more what I see in a person's eyes than what they say about them. Those words touched Matthew deeply. For months, he had been treated as guilty by everyone except his immediate family. Having someone, a stranger, express confidence in him was something he didn't expect. "Thank you," he said, his voice breaking. "Don't thank me. Just know that this church is not just a building or a place to come on Sundays. We are a family, and families support each other in difficult times." When they returned home that night, Matthew felt differently. Not that his troubles had disappeared. The charges were still there, the financial difficulties, the uncertainty about the future. But there was something new, a small flame of hope. "What do you think?" asked Helena as they got ready for bed. "It was different from what I expected," he replied honestly. "That song about God's faithfulness, it touched something in me." Helena smiled. "It is Pastor Josiah's favorite hymn. He says that in the most difficult moments of his life, this song reminded him that even when everything and everyone fails, God remains faithful." Matthew thought about it for a moment. "Do you think that God cares about what's happening to us? With injustice?" "I'm sure you do," Helena replied, caressing her face. "And I believe he is already working to restore what has been broken." That night, for the first time in months, Mateus slept without nightmares. The peace Matthew found that night in church was a brief respite in the storm that continued to intensify around him. The following week, he received the news he feared the most. The judge had accepted the request for preventive detention. "I'm sorry, Mateus," Dr. Mendez said on the phone. "We did everything we could, but the judge considered that there is a risk that you will interfere with the investigations if you remain free. How much time do I have?" "You must report to the federal police within 48 hours. 2 days. Just 2 days to prepare to leave your family, your freedom, your dignity behind." When he hung up the phone, Matthew felt the ground disappear under his feet. How would you tell Helena that? And worse, how would... She explained to Beatrice that her father would go to prison? That night, after Beatrice had fallen asleep, he and Helena sat down in the small living room of the apartment. "I need to tell you something," he began, his voice trembling. Helena looked at him, and he saw that she already knew. Somehow she always knew. "It's preventive detention, isn't it?" He nodded, unable to speak. Helena closed her eyes for a moment, took a deep breath, and then did something that surprised him. She knelt on the floor and began to pray. "Lord God, I know that you are faithful even when we do not understand your ways. In this moment of darkness, we ask for your light. We know that Matthew is innocent, and we trust that the truth will prevail. Give us strength to face these difficult days, protect our families, and show us your presence even in the most painful circumstances." Matthew watched, touched by his wife's unwavering faith. How could she maintain this confidence when everything indicated that? The worst was to come. When Helena finished praying, she sat down next to him and held his hands. "Let's get through this together," she said. "I will be with you every step of the way." "How am I going to tell Bea?" he asked, his voice breaking. Let's tell it together tomorrow. We will explain that it is temporary, that it is a mistake that will be corrected. And if it is not corrected, Helena, what if I get convicted of something I didn't do? Don't think about it now. One day at a time. Remember? That's what Pastor Josiah told us. The next morning, they sat down with Beatrice and, as gently as possible, explained the situation. Dad will need to be away for a while, Helena said. It's like when you go to school camp, only a little longer. But why? Asked Beatrice, her eyes filled with tears. You said you didn't do anything wrong. And I didn't, Princess, replied Mateus, fighting the lump in his throat. Sometimes it takes time for people to find out the truth. Meantime, I need to be patient. Can I come visit you? The innocent question nearly broke her heart. Yes, you will be able to visit me, and we'll talk on the phone, and you can write me letters telling me about school and your friends. Promise you'll be back soon? Matthew hesitated. He didn't want to make promises that he might not be able to keep. I promise I'll do everything I can to get back to you and Mom as soon as possible. That afternoon, Mateus went to the church to talk to. Pastor Josiah. He found it in the simple office organizing some food donations for needy families. Matthew, it's good to see you, greeted the pastor with a warm smile. But his smile disappeared when he saw the expression on the visitor's face. What happened? Preventive detention, said Mateus simply. I'll report tomorrow. Josiah closed his eyes for a moment, as if absorbing the impact of the news. Sit down, please. Matthew obeyed, feeling strangely calm now that he was there. Pastor, I don't know why I came here. Perhaps, maybe I just needed to talk to someone who didn't look at me like a criminal. You did well to come, replied Josiah. How are Helena and Beatrice? Trying to be strong. Helena has a faith that I have never seen before. I don't know how she can believe that everything will be okay when everything indicates otherwise. True faith is not believing that God will do everything our way, but trusting that, whatever the way, He will be with us. Matthew. Reflected on this for a moment. Pastor, I'll be honest. I don't know if I believe in God in the same way as Helena or you, but that hymn about God's faithfulness, I can't get it out of my head. Josiah smiled. You know, Matthew, sometimes God uses the most unlikely circumstances to reveal Himself to us. Perhaps this is the time when you will discover that when everything and everyone fails, He remains faithful. How can I trust that when I'm about to go to jail for something I didn't do? Let me tell you a story, Josiah said, leaning forward. Many years ago, when I was working as a chaplain, I met a man named Roberto. He had been convicted of a crime he did not commit and spent 7 years in prison before the truth came out. During those years, he lost everything: family, friends, career. What happened to him? In prison, he found God, not in a dramatic way with lights and voices, but in the silence of his cell, in the solitude of his nights. He once said to me, Pastor, I was free out there, but I was a prisoner of my own pride, my ambition, my self-sufficiency. Inside, behind these bars, I found a freedom that I have never known before. And after he was released, he became one of the most extraordinary men I have ever met. He dedicated his life to helping former inmates rebuild their lives. He said he wouldn't trade those 7 years for anything, because that's where he found his true purpose. Matthew was silent, absorbing the story. I'm not saying It's going to be easy, Josiah continued. Prison is a difficult place, especially for someone in your situation. But remember, circumstances don't define who you are. What defines you is how you respond to those circumstances. Before leaving, Josiah handed Matthew a small Bible. Take this with you. When you feel alone or afraid, turn to Psalms. David wrote many of them as he fled, unjustly persecuted. He'll understand what you're feeling. The next day, dressed in simple clothes and carrying only the essentials, Mateus said goodbye to Helena and Beatrice at the door of the apartment. Her daughter's hug, tight and desperate, almost broke her resolve. "Come back soon, Dad," she whispered through tears. "I'll try, Princess. Be strong and take care of Mommy for me, okay?" Helena hugged him last, holding his face in her hands. "Remember, one day at a time, and no matter what, you are loved. For me, for Bia, and for God." With a heavy heart, Mateus got into the car where Dr. Mendez was, waiting for him to take him to the federal police. In his shirt pocket, the small Bible Josiah had given him seemed to weigh like lead. As the car drove away, he looked back one last time. Helena and Beatrice were on the sidewalk, holding hands, waving. Your family, your world, everything that was worth fighting for. The process of entering the prison system was exactly as Mateus imagined: impersonal, humiliating, dehumanizing. Photograph, fingerprints, superficial medical examination, delivery of personal belongings, receipt of uniform, quick and cold instructions. "Oliveira, cell 27, block B," said the prison officer, pushing him lightly down the corridor. The provisional detention center was a gray and oppressive place. The smell of cheap disinfectant couldn't completely mask the odors of sweat, mold, and despair that pervaded the walls. Cell 27 was small, with 2 metal bunk beds, 4 thin mattresses, a toilet without a seat, and a stained sink. 3 men were already occupying the space, and they all looked at Matthew as he entered. "Look who's here," said one, a burly man with tattoos on his arms. "The famous businessman. I saw you on TV." Matthew felt a chill down his spine. Being recognized in prison was not exactly an advantage. "Relax," the man continued, realizing his fear. "I'm not a fan of beating corrupt people, but I'm not a fan of protecting them either. Stay in yours and I'll stay in mine." "I'm not corrupt," Matthew replied automatically. The 3 men laughed. "Of course not," said another inmate, younger, with scars on his face. "No one here is guilty of anything. We are all victims of the system, aren't we?" Matthew did not answer. He put his few allowed belongings, a few toiletries, an extra pair of socks, the small Bible, on the empty upper bunk, and sat down, trying to process his new reality. Subscribe to the channel. The days in prison followed a monotonous and suffocating routine, waking up early, tasteless breakfast, counting AE, few hours in the courtyard, lunch, more counting, time in the cell, dinner, last count, lights out, day after day without variation, without stimulus, without dignity. His cellmates, Marcone, the tattooed, James, the scarred young man, and so Antonio, an old man who rarely spoke, kept a respectful distance. They were not hostile, but they were not friendly either. It was a kind of tacit truce, based on the mutual understanding that each had their own demons to contend with. The visits of, Helena and Beatrice were the only bright spot in their gloomy existence. Every fortnight they came, going through the humiliating search and the long lines to see him for just an hour. "How are you?" asked Helena always, holding her hands on the table in the living room. "By surviving," he replied, trying to smile. "What about you?" "We are fine. The church has helped a lot. Pastor Josias organized a support group for families of inmates, and this has been a great comfort." Beatrice initially. Shy and frightened by the prison environment, gradually adapted. He brought drawings to his father, told him about school, tried to maintain a normality that broke Mateus's heart. It was on a particularly difficult night when despair seemed heavier than the humid air in the cell that Matthew finally opened the Bible that Josiah had given him. He leafed through the Psalms, as the pastor had suggested, and began to read. "Psalm 13, he muttered to himself. "How long, Lord? Will you forget me? Forever? How long will you hide your face from me?" The words, written thousands of years earlier, seemed to express exactly what he felt. He continued reading, absorbed, until a strange noise interrupted him. Someone had slipped a small piece of paper under the cell door. Intrigued, Matthew got out of the bunk and took the paper. On it, written in hurried handwriting, was a message that made her heart race. "I know you're innocent. I have proof. Tomorrow in the courtyard, 10 a.m. No." Subscription. No explanation. Just those cryptic words that suddenly lit a flame of hope that Matthew thought had long been extinguished. Who could have sent that message? Would it be a trap? Or had someone finally discovered the truth about Gustavo and his lies? And what evidence would this be that could free him from that nightmare? As the night wore on and his cellmates slept, Matthew remained awake, the note clutched in his hand, 1,000 questions swirling in his mind. For the first time in months, he felt something beyond resignation, a spark of possibility, a glimpse that maybe, just maybe, God's faithfulness was about to manifest itself in extraordinary ways. Don't miss the next episode of Thou Art Faithful, Lord. The anonymous note that came into Matthew's hands is not just a message. It is the first link in a chain of events that will shake the foundations of everything you thought you knew about this story. In the next few scenes, you will witness the encounter that will forever change the fate of an innocent man. Who is the mysterious ally who risked everything to make the truth come out? What dark secrets does this person carry about Gustavo and his elaborate conspiracy? The plot thickens when we discover that the betrayal goes far beyond what we imagined. As Matthew struggles to survive in a hostile environment where every glance can hide a threat, a web of lies begins to crumble in the outside world. Prepare your heart for moments of extreme anguish when Matthew discovers that it's not just his freedom that's at stake, but his very life. Gustavo's plan is more sinister than anyone could have imagined, and time is running out. You will be moved by the courage of those who, even though they have everything to lose, choose to be on the side of the truth. Witness the transformative power of faith when, at its darkest, an unexpected light rises on the horizon. Matthew's journey reminds us that even when all doors seem closed, God is working behind the scenes in ways we can't comprehend. His faithfulness transcends our most desperate circumstances. The episode that is starting now on your screen contains the most impactful twist of this saga of faith and perseverance. Find out how a small act of courage can unleash an avalanche of justice that no one can stop. Click immediately, so you don't miss a second of this extraordinary story that is touching hearts around the world. Share it with those who need a message of hope in difficult times. Thou art faithful, Lord, because even in the darkest valley, his light never goes out. Subscribe to the channel and leave your like.